In the autumn of 1943, as Allied forces pushed northward from Sicily, the desperate Italian fascists began emptying their secret camps. In a remote compound, 180 prisoners huddled in cold barracks marked for transport. Through the thin walls, they heard it, the dreaded low rumble of an approaching train. Another transport to take more of them away, they feared. The train's wheels groaned as it slowed, the screech of the brakes slicing through the heavy silence surrounding the southern Italian region of Basilicata. The guards at Pisticci camp didn't see anything out of the ordinary. A civilian train arriving like any other. The train lurched to a stop with a sudden jolt. Everything went silent. Inside the train, a gangster-turned-legionnaire checked his weapon one final time. An aristocrat who could drive locomotives listened for any sign of alarm. A disgraced tank commander steadied his breathing. 80 kilometers deep into enemy territory, they had just stolen an entire train. And now the real fun was about to begin. A last-minute mission. The summer of 1943 marked the Allied invasion of Italy following the fall of Sicily, a bold thrust into the heart of Axis Europe. But the fight for Italy would be anything but easy. German forces, deeply entrenched and unwilling to surrender an inch without a fight, turned the rugged terrain into a battlefield of attrition. Every road, town, and stronghold was fiercely defended. Every Allied operation had to be calculated and precise. In the early uncertainty of the Italian campaign, the British Special Air Service, or SAS, became a vital tool in the Allied arsenal. They had landed in Taranto on September 9, 1943, only 6 days after the initial advance into Italy. Operating deep behind enemy lines, the SAS specialized in sabotage, destroying supply depots, cutting communications, and rescuing civilians trapped in the crossfire. With Italy's imminent surrender, their mission expanded. Allied prisoners of war were being liberated across the country, though the full horror of Nazi concentration camps remained largely unknown. But one camp, hidden from the world, demanded their attention. The intelligence came from a man named Zelko, a Yugoslav prisoner who had escaped from a little-known concentration camp in southern Italy. Held in the Pisticci concentration camp, a secret site deep in Italy's Basilicata region, Zelko had endured months of brutality alongside Jews, resistance fighters, intellectuals, artists, and Catholic priests. The Nazis had been using the camp as a holding place for prisoners captured after their occupation of Italy. But the Germans started to move the prisoners, Jews and resistance fighters alike. Zelko understood what this meant and had to act. He knew the camp's routines well, and he used his knowledge to slip past the guards. Under the cover of darkness, he made his way through enemy territory, evading German patrols and moving toward the Allied lines. By the time he reached the Allied bridgehead, Zelko was exhausted, disheveled, and nearly starving. But he had one urgent message. The Pisticci camp was about to be emptied. The prisoners were set to be shipped off to their doom. Zelko explained how the camp was hidden, how the prisoners were guarded, and the atrocities he had witnessed. He begged the SAS to act before it was too late. The Pisticci camp, whose commandant was a notorious Italian fascist colonel, had been kept under wraps by the Germans, and its existence was a secret they were desperate to protect. But now, with Zelko's knowledge, the mission had to happen, and they had to act quickly. The lives of hundreds of prisoners depended on them. The SAS needed a leader who understood the cost of hesitation, and Major Oswald Cary Elwes rose to the task. He had the precision, the experience, and the ruthless resolve to take charge of this mission and turn it into a strike no one would forget. Hastily assembled heroes. Major Oswald Aloysius Joseph Cary Elwes was the kind of officer who stood out in any crowd, his aristocratic background giving him an air of distinction. Trained at Sandhurst, Cary Elwes had served in the British Army with traditional rigor before his path took an unexpected turn. David Sterling, the founder of the SAS, saw something in the young officer, recruiting him into the unit where unconventional warfare demanded men with more than just military discipline. Cary Elwes' sharp mind and resourcefulness made him a natural fit for the SAS. His military career was defined by one strikingly unusual skill, an affinity for trains. As Cary Elwes later told it, quote, "Driving a locomotive was one of the skills we had learned in the course of SAS training." This knowledge of trains would be the cornerstone of the mission, allowing him to mastermind the plan that would save 180 prisoners. Cary Elwes and the SAS wouldn't be working alone. They would get much-needed help from members of the French Foreign Legion, including one man, Raymond Courreau, aka Captain Jack William Raymond Lee. Courreau, a former gangster-turned-legionnaire turned French resistance fighter, had already seen the worst of war. He'd fought in the 1942 Operation Chariot raid on Saint-Nazaire, where he was shot twice in both legs and left for KIA. Afterward, he'd been recruited to the 2nd SAS by Colonel Bill Sterling, the older brother of David, who'd founded the elite unit and had recruited Cary Elwes not long before. But survival wasn't his only skill. He'd earned a reputation for his fearless work rescuing Jewish families and leading sabotage operations in Nazi-occupied France. His record in the field made him an ideal candidate for the SAS, and by 1943, Courreau had joined the ranks. Courreau was an ideal leader for the French resistance fighters integrated into the British SAS mission. His expertise in sabotage and logistics would prove invaluable when it came to hijacking the Italian train meant to ferry the prisoners to safety. Finally, Cary Elwes and Courreau would be joined by a third member of the team, a man marred by disgrace, now ready for redemption. Charles "Charlie" Hackney had a past steeped in misfortune. As a tank commander in North Africa, he had survived 2 catastrophic attacks that ended the lives of the rest of his entire crew each time. After the second, with the stench of battle still fresh, Hackney refused to take command of a new crew and a new tank. Exhausted, unshaven, and in tattered clothes, he was arrested for desertion, facing a court-martial that could lead to execution. As he sat in his cell in the desert brig, waiting for the inevitable, the door opened, and a tall, aristocratic figure stepped in. Cary Elwes, with his striking mustache and commanding presence, had heard Hackney's story. He came with an offer: join the SAS or face the consequences. Hackney, still weary and uncertain of his future, saw the offer as a lifeline. He packed his kit without hesitation and made the over 1,500-kilometer journey out of Africa toward Europe. Redemption, it seemed, was just a new battlefield away. Hackney's skills as a tactician and experience under fire would serve him well in the upcoming mission. Together, Cary Elwes, Courreau, and Hackney formed an unlikely but effective team. All aboard. Cary Elwes had a plan. A standard raid wouldn't work. Cary Elwes knew it, and so did the rest of the team. They would hijack a train. The Italian railway network, while vast, had a few weaknesses. The Pisticci concentration camp was 80 kilometers behind enemy lines, and the Nazis had recently planned to transport its prisoners to Germany, meaning their control of the rail network was firmly in place. But the train wasn't just to help them sneak into Pisticci. It was also a rescue vessel. They would need the train to transport the 180 prisoners, freed from the clutches of their captors, back to Allied lines. Planning was complicated. Getting 50 men into position behind enemy lines required stealth and secrecy. Courreau had worked to secure safe passage and safe houses for the commandos, while Cary Elwes ensured the train's route remained clear. Each part of the operation depended on the others, the French resistance holding their ground, the commandos slipping into position, and the logistics of getting the train back without alerting enemy patrols. The plan was set in motion. The train would be hijacked on September 12th at Chiatona Station, 20 kilometers west of Taranto. The commandos and the French resistance had already infiltrated the area, positioning themselves out of sight. Cary Elwes surveyed the tracks, his mind running through every detail of the plan. Every turn, every switch, every checkpoint. They were ready. The train's approach sent a wave of tension through the team. Hackney kept watch for any signs of detection. A quiet murmur spread through the group as they heard the rumbling of the locomotive getting closer. Hackney, working with the French fighters, signaled the attack. Within seconds, the commandos stormed the platform, rushing toward the locomotive and the armed guards who were already at the station. The French resistance fighters moved fast, taking positions to cover the train's exit routes. Cary Elwes was the first to board the train, slipping into the conductor's cabin with practiced ease, his mind already on the mission's next phase. He quickly worked the controls. But just as the train was ready to move, he stepped off to lead a separate patrol of Willys MB Jeeps, light utility vehicles well adapted for high-speed, deep penetration missions behind enemy lines. Armed with twin Vickers machine guns, 50 caliber Brownings, Bren guns, Tommy guns, grenades, and explosives, their Jeeps could deliver overwhelming firepower as they surged ahead to secure crossroads and junctures. The train lurched forward, its wheels screaming against the tracks. The other commandos and resistance fighters scrambled to secure the last cars, pushing back the remaining Italian guards and forcing them to surrender. The train was now in their control. On September 13, 1943, the train full of SAS troops and French Foreign Legion fighters set off from Gietona, barreling west into enemy territory. But the 80-kilometer route to Pisticci was far from smooth. As the train rumbled forward, the commandos faced one obstacle after another. Enemy patrols were a constant threat. Hackney, whose role was vital in maintaining the train's speed and ensuring it stayed on course, was in constant communication with other SAS units positioned ahead. The terrain posed its own challenges: sharp turns, steep inclines, and the threat of detection at any moment. But the team moved with focus. Hackney dealt with every complication that arose, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of enemy movement. They couldn't afford a mistake. The mission had to stay under the radar, and every second counted. Finally, on September 14th, the train neared the outskirts of Pisticci. A swift liberation. The prison guards stood watch, bored and alert in equal measure. Just an ordinary Italian commuter train rumbling toward them. They'd seen it all before. Lewis recounts the reaction of the guards, quote, "They see an Italian train steaming up to the camp. What's there to be suspicious of?" But then the train doors swung open. Lewis goes on, quote, "It's only when they burst off that train and storm into the camp, guns blazing, that the enemy guards realize that this is an assault. It's inconceivable to them that this is really happening." Some guards didn't even have time to draw their weapons before being taken down. Others tried to resist, but their efforts were futile. The attackers were already inside, and any chance of holding them off had evaporated. In an instant, the guards found themselves helpless, taken by the speed and precision of the assault. Inside the camp, the prisoners, many of whom were emaciated and broken, didn't know what was happening. The noise from the gunfire, the shouts from the commandos, and the sudden movement of the guards were all too much. The prisoners, initially hesitant, were quickly rounded up. Some of them were unsure if this was another trap, but the commandos reassured them, and soon the camp was in full disarray. Carrie Elwes led the charge through the barracks, clearing rooms and driving the Nazi guards back. Garreau and Hackney worked alongside the SAS, providing backup and ensuring the prisoners were evacuated. The Nazis, now trapped in their own camp, fought with desperation, but it was useless. The commandos had them outnumbered, and their surprise assault had broken their resolve. Carrie Elwes and Garreau moved quickly through the camp toward the commandant's office. Inside, the fascist colonel was attempting to organize a counterattack, but it was already too late. The commandos burst into the room, and the colonel, seeing his fate sealed, tried to make a break for it. But before he could escape, Garreau grabbed him, swiftly overpowering the man and dragging him back into the office. With the prisoners secured, the commandos began the difficult process of moving them back to the train. The task was complicated. Some of the prisoners could barely walk. Others were so weak that they needed to be carried. The train was waiting, but it wouldn't be enough to just get them aboard. The escape had to happen without alerting any nearby Axis forces. Hackney worked furiously, coordinating the evacuation. The commandos pushed the prisoners to the train, moving with purpose. Hackney ensured the path was clear, using everything at his disposal to make sure the train stayed undetected as it began the return journey. The ride back was as tense as the journey in. Enemy forces had been alerted, and the commandos had to navigate through dangerous territory. The train tracks, while a gift in terms of speed, were also a potential trap if the wrong patrol spotted them. The train sped through the night, the men and the prisoners silently praying they would make it back to Allied lines. In the end, they did. The train reached the safety of Allied territory, and the mission, against all odds, was a success. The prisoners were freed, The fascist commandant was captured, and the raid became one of the most daring operations the SAS had ever undertaken. Except nobody would know of their valor for a long time to come. The Forgotten Victory. The success of the raid on Pisticci did not lead to public recognition or military acclaim. Instead, the British government chose to suppress details of the operation, ensuring it faded from history for nearly 8 decades. The British authorities feared that revealing the raid's true nature would expose Italy's concentration camps, largely unknown to the outside world. These camps, established by Mussolini's fascist regime, were hidden from public knowledge, and exposing them would draw unwanted attention to Italy's role in the Holocaust. This suppression was initially motivated by the need to bring the enemy to heel and end the war. As Lewis explained it, quote, "If you publicize the concentration camps to the British, American, and wider Allied publics, it would demonize the enemy. That would make them less likely to surrender, and the war would go on longer." In terms of post-war diplomacy, the raid risked highlighting the collaboration between Italian fascists and Nazis, a delicate issue for both sides. Suppressing the operation helped craft a more favorable narrative to Italy, portraying it as a nation liberated from an imposed fascist rule. This allowed Italy to distance itself from the Nazi horrors it had once been complicit in, just 1 month before officially switching sides on October 13, 1943. After the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in April 1945, news of this and other similar camps in Italy was documented and made known in Britain. Yet the SAS raid on Pisticci still remained covered up. This also meant that for the men who had participated, the operation would become an invisible chapter of their careers. Lewis notes, quote, "You would think that a mission like this would lead to an array of decorations, but no medals were awarded for it." Cary Elwes, who had commanded the operation, would go on to have a distinguished career, but his role in the Pisticci raid would remain unmentioned in official military records. Raymond Carreau, the former gangster known for his time in the French Resistance and his role in saving Jews from the Gestapo, continued his work with the SAS, but received little recognition for his part in one of the unit's most audacious missions. Charles Hackney, once a tank commander with a storied history, never saw his bravery or his crucial role in the raid acknowledged by the higher-ups in any formal capacity. It wasn't until years later that fragments of the story began to emerge through research. It took persistent efforts by historians and the slow release of declassified documents to piece together the raid's full scope and significance. Eventually, the raid would get recognition in military historian Damian Lewis's 2023 book, SAS, Forged in Hell. As for more public exposure to this story, he comments, quote, "If you wrote this as a Hollywood movie outline, people would say, no, that's too far-fetched. But this absolutely happened. It's absolutely true."